Hello, my name is Tanner Knauth with SimplyEandO, and we are a trusted resource for real estate errors and omissions insurance. Today I want to talk a little bit about what exactly an E&O policy is and why you, as a real estate professional, should always have an E&O policy in place. Now, an E&O policy is a professional liability policy and is designed to protect you against an alleged error or omission made by you while performing a professional service. A common claim against a real estate professional could be something as simple as a misrepresentation of the property condition. And so it's important to understand what exactly is in your E&O policy and what's covered and what is not. And the first thing you want to look at whenever you're looking at your E&O policy is your declarations page. Now, your declarations page, or sometimes referred to as a deck page, is basically a summary of the policy. And one key thing that you are going to want to pay attention to is the named insured. Especially if you are a firm who has a real estate E&O policy, you want to make sure that all of your firm names that you're doing business under are listed in the deck page. Now, you'll also find your limits of liability on the deck page. Pay special attention here because there are several different types of limits of liability. The one that you want to pay attention to is your per occurrence limit. This can range anywhere from $100,000 to several million dollars depending on your needs. Now, the single occurrence is how much an insurance company will pay you per occurrence during the policy period. For instance, if you buy a E&O policy that it has a $100,000 per occurrence limit, the insurance company will only pay up to $100,000 per claim. But a lot of times an E&O policy will also have an aggregate limit. And what this means is it's how much the insurance company will pay during the lifetime of the policy. The lifetime of a policy is usually 1 year. So, for instance, if you get a policy for $100,000 per occurrence with a $300,000 aggregate limit, the company will pay, or the insurance company will pay $100,000 per claim, but $300,000 over the lifetime of the policy, irrelevant of how many claims you have. Now, another thing that you want to pay attention to, in addition to the policy limits, there are sometimes special limits within those policy limits. For instance, you can have a fair housing discrimination limit, or a defense cost limit, or a lockbox liability limit. You want to pay special attention to the wording of those limits. For instance, if you have a defense limit of $25,000, you want to make sure, see if the wording is in addition to your per occurrence limit or included in your per occurrence limit. For example, let's say you have a $100,000 policy per occurrence with a $25,000 defense cost limit, and that's included in your per occurrence. So if you have a judgment filed against you for $100,000 and it costs $20,000 to defend, the insurance company would only pay up to $100,000. Now, if your defense cost were in addition to your per occurrence limit of liability, and you had a similar judgment where you had a judgment go against you for $100,000 and you had a $20,000 defense cost, both of those costs would be covered by the insurance company. So just make sure whenever you're looking at your policy and working with your agent that you get the wording down on your limits of liability and understand completely what is covered, what's not covered, and what is in addition to and what is included in those limits of liability. Now, another thing you want to look at whenever you're dealing with your policy is whether you are on an occurrence policy or a claims made policy. Now, in an occurrence policy, what matters is when the claim actually occurred and what policy is in place when the claim occurred. So let's say, for example, you open up a policy on January 1st, 2011. It's an occurrence policy. There's a claim filed against you on January 2nd, 2011 for a transaction that occurred in 2010. Now, because you did not have a policy in place in 2010, under your occurrence policy, you would not be covered. However, there are also a claims-based policy. Now, in a claims-made policy, in a claims-made policy, what matters is when the claim was actually made. So, in the same scenario, let's say you open up a policy January 1st, 2011. It's a claims-made policy. On January 2nd, a claim is made against you stemming from a transaction in 2010. Now, because the claim was made on January 2nd, 2011, your claims made policy is in effect. But that also brings us to another point of prior acts coverage. So what I always recommend to a client is that you get full prior acts coverage. What this means is that basically for a real estate agent, if you have full prior acts coverage, any transaction, any licensed transaction you have performed would be covered on your claims made policy. Now a full prior acts coverage does raise the premium, and so there are alternatives. You can have no prior acts coverage, but for instance, in the scenario we had before, if you opened up a policy on January 1st, 2011, it's a claims made policy, but you have no prior acts coverage, somebody makes a claim against you stemming from an act in 2010, you would not be covered. But if you did have full prior acts coverage, you would be covered. There are also some companies out there that will offer a retroactive date on your prior acts coverage. For instance, a 2-year retroactive date prior acts coverage. What this means is that all your transactions that occurred 2 years prior to the start of the policy date would be covered. Now, the other thing that you want to look at is your exclusions in your policy. A common exclusion is a mold exclusion. So whenever you're working with your policy, you want to make sure you go through with your agent and go through all the different exclusions so you know exactly what is covered and what is not covered. It's very, very vital that you go through and work with your agent and understand your policy, because as real estate becomes more and more complicated, so does the insurance policy, and understanding exactly what it is you have in your E&O policy. I want to thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. My number is 770-888-2443, or you can visit our website, www.SimplyEandO.com.